In the history of Rome, few names struck as much fear as Hannibal Barca. To Roman citizens, Hannibal became a living nightmare, a general who seemed unstoppable, a figure who carried the vengeance of Carthage across mountains and rivers into the very heart of Italy. His campaign during the Second Punic War, fought between Rome and Carthage from 218 to 201 BCE, stands as one of the most audacious and brilliant military efforts in the ancient world. The Second Punic War was not simply a conflict between two cities. It was a struggle between two rising powers for control of the Mediterranean. Rome, dominant in Italy, had begun to spread its influence overseas after defeating Carthage in the First Punic War. Carthage, although weakened, remained wealthy and powerful, particularly in Spain, where Hannibal's father, Hannibal Barca, had established a strong base. It was in this world of rivalry, revenge, and imperial ambition that Hannibal grew up. The invasion of Italy was Hannibal's masterpiece. He did what few thought possible. He led a massive army, complete with cavalry and even elephants, across the Pyrenees, through hostile Gaul, and over the snow-covered Alps into Italy. Once there, he won a series of legendary battles at the Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae that nearly shattered Rome's armies and threatened its very survival. This narrative follows Hannibal's daring invasion, the background and causes of the war, the march across the Alps, the major battles in Italy, and the eventual Roman resilience that prevented Hannibal from ultimate victory. It is a story of genius and endurance, triumph and failure, ambition and destiny. The Second Punic War, one of the most famous and dramatic struggles of antiquity, did not emerge suddenly, but was the result of deep tensions that had been building for decades between Rome and Carthage. The seeds of the conflict were sown in the First Punic War, a long and exhausting contest fought over Sicily. When that war ended in 241 BCE, Rome emerged victorious, and Carthage, once the dominant naval power of the Western Mediterranean, found itself humbled and diminished. Carthage had to surrender Sicily, pay a massive war indemnity, and accept Roman dominance in the central Mediterranean. For the Carthaginians, this was not just a political defeat, but a wound to their pride and ambitions. Yet Carthage was not destroyed. It remained wealthy, resourceful, and eager to recover its lost power. In the years after the First Punic War, Carthage turned away from Sicily and looked instead toward Spain, a land rich in minerals, manpower, and opportunities. It was Hannibal Barca, the father of Hannibal, who led this new venture. Hannibal was a veteran of the war against Rome and a man determined to rebuild Carthage's fortunes. With his skill as a commander, he began conquering and negotiating with Iberian tribes, carving out a new Carthaginian empire in the peninsula. The silver mines of Spain replenished Carthage's treasury, and the local warriors provided recruits for its armies. Hannibal, according to tradition, also impressed upon his young son Hannibal a personal hatred of Rome. Ancient writers record that Hannibal swore an oath before his father never to be a friend to the Romans. Whether this oath was literal or legendary, it symbolized a hostility that defined his life. When Hannibal died, his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair continued the expansion of Carthaginian Spain and founded New Carthage as its administrative center. This city became the heart of Carthage's Iberian power. Hasdrubal also signed a treaty with Rome in which Carthage promised not to expand north of the Ebro River, yet tension remained. Rome had allies south of the river, and one of these was Saguntum, a city that became the spark of the coming war. In 221 BCE, Hasdrubal was assassinated, and Hannibal, still a young man in his mid-20s, was chosen as commander by the army. The soldiers already admired him for his bravery, endurance, and ability to inspire loyalty. His leadership soon became clear as he campaigned across Spain, extending Carthaginian influence further than ever. Hannibal's decision to attack Saguntum in 219 BCE was the turning point. The city lay south of the Ebro, and therefore within Carthage's agreed sphere, but its alliance with Rome made the assault a direct provocation. Rome demanded Hannibal's surrender. The Carthaginian government refused, standing behind their general. The result was inevitable. Rome declared war in 218 BCE, beginning the Second Punic War. At this moment, Hannibal faced a strategic choice. The obvious expectation was that the war would be fought in Spain, Sicily, or North Africa, where Carthage and Rome had fought before. But Hannibal devised a much bolder plan. He would carry the war directly into Italy itself, forcing Rome to fight for its survival on its own soil. His reasoning was based on an acute understanding of Roman power. Rome's strength lay not only in its armies but in its network of Italian allies. If he could invade Italy and defeat Roman forces there, many of these allies might abandon Rome and side with him. By striking the Republic at its heart, he could unravel the alliance system that made it so formidable. This strategy demanded a feat that seemed impossible. To reach Italy from Spain by land, Hannibal would need to cross the Pyrenees, march through hostile Gaul, and then traverse the towering barrier of the Alps. No general had ever attempted such a crossing with an entire army, let alone one that included cavalry and war elephants. The risks were enormous. Hostile tribes, brutal weather, narrow passes, and constant danger of starvation. Yet Hannibal believed the prize justified the risk. He gathered an army of about 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and nearly 40 elephants. His troops were a diverse coalition of Iberians, Libyans, Numidians, Gauls, and others. Each brought distinct strengths. Iberian infantry, skilled in close combat, Numidian horsemen, who were the finest light cavalry of the ancient world, and the elephants, whose presence was intended to terrify enemies unaccustomed to such beasts. Holding this diverse force together required exceptional leadership, and Hannibal provided it. He shared in the hardships of his men, ate their rations, and endured their marches. His charisma bound them to him with loyalty. The march began with the crossing of the Pyrenees, where Hannibal encountered resistance from local tribes. Fighting through ambushes and rough terrain, he lost men but kept pressing forward. By the time he entered Gaul, his army was smaller but still formidable. Along the Rhine River, Roman forces tried to intercept him, but Hannibal outmaneuvered them, using rafts to ferry his elephants and staging feints to confuse the enemy. He slipped past Roman attempts to block him and moved toward the Alps. This was the decisive moment, the gamble upon which his strategy rested. The crossing of the Alps was an ordeal beyond imagination. The exact route remains uncertain, debated by historians even today. But whichever path Hannibal chose, it was filled with danger. Hostile tribes attacked his columns from high cliffs. Rockslides destroyed narrow paths. Soldiers and animals slipped on ice and plunged to their deaths. The cold was unbearable for men from warmer lands, and snow blinded and exhausted them. Supplies dwindled, and hunger gnawed at the army. Yet Hannibal refused to turn back. He encouraged his troops constantly, reminding them that beyond the mountains lay the rich lands of Italy, where they would find food, plunder, and glory. When blocked by sheer rock, he used fire and vinegar to crack it apart, creating a path. His ingenuity and willpower kept the army moving forward despite losses. By the time they descended into the Po Valley in northern Italy, the army had been reduced dramatically. Of the original 90,000 infantry, only around 20,000 remained. The cavalry had fallen from 12,000 to about 6,000. Only a few of the elephants survived. But those who had endured the march were now hardened veterans, bound together by shared suffering and absolute loyalty to their commander. They emerged, not broken but fierce, ready to fight. The fact that Hannibal had succeeded in bringing them across at all was itself a kind of victory. It astonished the ancient world. No one had believed such a feat possible, and now a foreign army stood in Italy, ready to challenge Rome directly. The psychological impact was immense. Romans, who had expected to fight Hannibal in Spain or Sicily, suddenly found him in their homeland. His presence inspired many Gauls of northern Italy to join his cause, swelling his numbers and strengthening his position. The crossing of the Alps became legendary, not only for its audacity, but also for its symbolic meaning. It demonstrated Hannibal's relentless determination, his willingness to attempt the impossible, and his capacity to endure hardships that would have broken lesser leaders. The crossing transformed him in the eyes of both his soldiers and his enemies into a figure of almost supernatural will. Thus, the road to war, which had begun with the bitterness of Carthage's defeat in the First Punic War and the ambitions of the Barcid family in Spain, now led to Italy itself. Hannibal had inherited his father's hatred of Rome and his vision of Carthaginian revival. By daring to march his army across the mountains, he had outmaneuvered Rome's expectations and turned the balance of the conflict upside down. Though his army was smaller than it had been at the start, it was now poised to unleash a series of battles that would bring Rome closer to destruction than at any point in its history. The war had only begun, and the true test of Hannibal's genius would be revealed in the campaigns to come. Part 2. The Battles of Trebia, Lake Trasimene and Cannae. When Hannibal descended into the plains of northern Italy after his harrowing crossing of the Alps, he carried with him not only the scars of that ordeal, but also a vision of conquest that would shake the foundations of the Roman Republic. The army he led was smaller than the one he had set out with in Spain, yet it was an army that had been tested by suffering and hardened by adversity. Hannibal's men were now bound to him with unshakable loyalty, for he had shared their hardships, marched at their side, eaten their rations, and endured the same freezing nights in the mountains. They trusted him, and this trust would prove decisive in the coming battles. Rome, on the other hand, was caught unprepared for the swiftness and audacity of his invasion. They had expected to confront him in Spain or Sicily. Instead, he stood in Italy itself, forging alliances with discontented tribes and challenging Rome on its own soil. The first great clash came at the river Trebia in late 218 BC. The Roman consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, eager for glory, marched his legions north to meet Hannibal. The Romans still underestimated their opponent, believing that this foreign general, weakened by his crossing of the Alps, could not possibly pose a serious threat. Hannibal, however, understood the Roman mentality and exploited it. He knew they were proud, aggressive, and often impatient for battle. On a freezing morning, with snow on the ground and icy winds cutting across the valley, Hannibal set his trap. He ordered his brother Mago to conceal a picked force of soldiers in ambush near the river. Then, he sent his Numidian cavalry forward to provoke the Romans into crossing the Trebia. Sempronius, eager to fight, fell into the snare. The Roman soldiers, chilled to the bone and weakened by hunger, waded through the icy water to reach Hannibal's army. When they emerged on the other side, Hannibal's well-fed and rested troops fell upon them with fury. As the battle raged, Mago's hidden force struck the Romans from the rear, turning their confusion into disaster. The Roman legions were overwhelmed. Thousands were cut down, and the survivors fled in disarray. The defeat at Trebia shocked Rome, for it revealed Hannibal's tactical brilliance and the vulnerability of their legions when facing an enemy who could outthink them. After Trebia, Hannibal moved south, seeking to draw Rome's allies away from their allegiance. He understood that Rome's true strength did not lie merely in its armies, but in the loyalty of its Italian confederates. If he could break that alliance, Rome's power would crumble. His march was not simply a military campaign, but also a political strategy, intended to demonstrate to Rome's allies that resistance to the Republic was possible. Along the way, he gathered support from Gallic tribes and impressed potential allies with his victories. Rome, however, was determined to resist. They sent another army to stop him, commanded by Gaius Flaminius, a consul known for his rashness. Flaminius believed he could restore Roman pride by crushing Hannibal swiftly. Yet once again, Hannibal's understanding of psychology and terrain gave him the advantage. In June of 217 BCE, near Lake Trasimene in central Italy, Hannibal set another trap that would become one of the most famous ambushes in history. He chose a narrow valley beside the lake, where wooded hills hemmed in the road. He placed his army in concealed positions along the ridges and waited. When Flaminius led his legions along the path, Hannibal's troops descended upon them from all sides. The Romans were caught completely unprepared. They had no chance to form their usual battle lines. Confusion spread as soldiers were attacked from above, from behind, and from the front. The fog rising from the lake added to the chaos, turning the battle into a massacre. Flaminius himself was slain, and his army was annihilated. Ancient sources tell us that as many as 15,000 Romans were killed in a single morning, making Lake Trasimene the largest ambush in recorded military history. Rome was stunned. Their legions, the pride of the Republic, had been destroyed not by brute force but by cunning and deception. The defeat sent waves of panic through the city. Citizens feared Hannibal might march directly on Rome itself. Yet Hannibal did not do so. Instead, he continued to move through Italy, spreading destruction and undermining Roman authority. His goal was not merely to sack the city of Rome, which was heavily fortified, but to fracture the alliances that held the Republic together. He marched through the Italian countryside, freeing prisoners of war to show that his quarrel was with Rome, not with the Italian peoples. He promised independence to those who would join him, hoping to build a coalition against the Republic. And indeed, some cities and tribes began to waver. Rome, desperate to regain control, turned to Quintus Fabius Maximus, who was appointed dictator. Fabius recognized that Hannibal could not be defeated in open battle. Instead, he adopted a strategy of delay, avoiding direct confrontation and harassing Hannibal's supply lines. This cautious approach earned him the nickname the Delayer. It frustrated both Romans and Hannibal, but it preserved Roman strength at a time when rash engagements might have led to further disasters. Yet Rome was not a city that tolerated patience for long. The people wanted decisive victory, and in 216 BCE they sought it at Cannae. The Battle of Cannae remains one of the most studied battles in all of military history, a masterpiece of tactical genius that demonstrated Hannibal's ability to turn weakness into strength. Rome, determined to crush him once and for all, raised one of the largest armies it had ever fielded, perhaps as many as 80,000 infantry and cavalry. They were led by the consuls Lucius, Aemilius, Paulus, and Gaius Terentius Varro. Confident in their numbers, the Romans intended to use the sheer weight of their forces to smash Hannibal's smaller army. Hannibal, however, anticipated their plan and devised a formation that would exploit their very strength. He arranged his troops in a crescent shape, with his weaker Iberian and Gallic infantry in the center and his stronger African veterans on the flanks. His cavalry, especially the agile Numidians, were positioned to control the wings. When the battle began, the Roman legions hurled themselves at Hannibal's center, pressing forward with overwhelming force. At first, it seemed they were succeeding, as the Carthaginian line bent backward under the pressure. But this was precisely what Hannibal intended. As the Romans pushed forward, the crescent gradually folded in on itself, drawing them deeper into the trap. Meanwhile, Hannibal's cavalry had already driven the Roman horsemen from the field. With the Roman cavalry scattered, Hannibal's horsemen swung around to attack the Roman infantry from behind. At the same time, the Carthaginian veterans on the flanks pivoted inward, enveloping the Romans on both sides. Within hours, the vast Roman army was surrounded, crushed together in a tightening ring, unable to maneuver or breathe. The legions were slaughtered where they stood. Ancient sources claim that as many as 50,000 Romans were killed in a single day, including a large number of senators and officers. It was the greatest disaster in Roman military history. The defeat at Cannae was so complete that it seemed the Republic itself might collapse. In the aftermath of Cannae, Hannibal's strategy reached its climax. Many of Rome's allies, especially in southern Italy, abandoned the Republic and joined him. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, opened its gates to him, providing him with a valuable base. Macedon and Greece entered into alliance with Carthage, seeing an opportunity to weaken Rome. The victory at Cannae was more than a battlefield triumph. It was a political earthquake that shook Rome's network of alliances and threatened to undo centuries of careful diplomacy. Yet despite the magnitude of his success, Hannibal still faced a challenge. Rome, though battered and bloodied, refused to surrender. The Senate voted not to negotiate with Hannibal under any circumstances. The city mobilized every resource, training new legions and extending military service beyond its usual limits. Women gave up their jewelry to fund the war, and slaves were offered freedom in exchange for fighting. Rome showed a resilience that astonished even its enemies. Though half its armies had been annihilated at Cannae, the Republic refused to yield. Hannibal's failure to march directly on Rome after Cannae has been the subject of debate for centuries. Some argue that he lacked the siege equipment to take the heavily fortified city. Others suggest he hoped that Rome would collapse politically without the need for a direct assault. Whatever the reason, the moment passed, and Rome endured. Over time, the initial shock of Hannibal's victories faded, and the strategy of attrition pursued by Fabius Maximus regained credibility. Still, the battles of Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae stand as enduring testaments to Hannibal's genius. Each showed a different aspect of his skill. At Trebia, the use of deception and ambush. At Trasimene, the perfect execution of terrain-based strategy. And at Cannae, the ultimate demonstration of encirclement tactics, still studied in military academies today. For Rome, these defeats were catastrophic, but they also became the crucible in which the Republic's resilience was forged. Hannibal had brought Rome to the brink of destruction, but he had not broken its will. The struggle was far from over, and the war would rage on for years, testing the endurance of both Carthage and Rome. Part 3. Hannibal's long war in Italy and Rome's resilience. After the catastrophe at Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal stood at the height of his power in Italy. Few commanders in history had inflicted such devastation upon Rome. 3 great Roman armies had been annihilated in succession, and the Republic had lost tens of thousands of its citizens in the span of just a few years. Allies were wavering. The countryside was scarred by war, and the fear of Carthage's great general hung over every decision in the Senate. Yet Rome did not collapse. The victories of Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae were as much political gambits as military triumphs. For Hannibal sought not only to destroy armies, but also to unravel the confederation of Italian allies that formed the backbone of Roman power. His hope was that the shock of these disasters would persuade cities and tribes to abandon Rome and align themselves with Carthage. Indeed, his strategy met with partial success. Capua, one of the wealthiest and most important cities of Italy, defected to his side. Several other southern communities, along with many of the Greek cities in the south, opened their gates to him. Even Syracuse in Sicily, which had long been aligned with Rome, shifted its allegiance to Carthage. To Hannibal, this seemed the beginning of a great unraveling of Roman strength. But Rome did not fall apart. Instead, the city steeled itself for the long struggle ahead. The Senate refused to negotiate with Hannibal, declaring that the Republic would never treat with him no matter the scale of the disaster. Roman resilience in the face of catastrophe was a quality that astonished friend and foe alike. They raised new armies, even recruiting slaves and promising them freedom, a measure almost unthinkable in Roman tradition. They extended military service terms indefinitely, forcing citizens to fight year after year without the usual breaks. Women donated jewelry to fund the war effort, and young boys were trained for service earlier than ever before. In this collective mobilization, the Roman people demonstrated a unity that was not easily broken by battlefield defeats. Where another city might have surrendered, Rome hardened. The spirit of the Republic, fueled by a determination not to bow to a foreign general, became Hannibal's greatest obstacle. Meanwhile, Hannibal tried to consolidate his position. After Cannae, he had hoped that Rome's Latin allies would abandon the Republic en masse, but the majority of them remained loyal. The Latin colonies, bound to Rome by strong institutions and benefits, refused to defect, and this deprived Hannibal of the broad coalition he had hoped for. He lacked the siege equipment and manpower, to storm the city of Rome itself. And without decisive reinforcements from Carthage, his position became more precarious. Carthage, cautious and divided in its politics, sent him some aid, but never the overwhelming support he needed. Thus, despite his brilliant victories, Hannibal was left to wage a long and grinding war deep within enemy territory, cut off from his homeland and reliant on what he could secure from Italy itself. For over a decade, Hannibal maintained his army in Italy, fighting battles, skirmishes, and maneuvers that kept Rome constantly on edge. His presence tied down huge numbers of Roman soldiers and prevented them from focusing entirely on other fronts of the war. He became a shadow that haunted the Republic, unpredictable and dangerous. Yet, his inability to deliver the final blow meant that Rome gradually adapted. The Fabian strategy of delay, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal, cutting off his supplies, and wearing him down through attrition, slowly proved effective. Hannibal could still win victories in the field, but these no longer shattered Rome's strength as they once had. Rome rebuilt its legions again and again, and each year the Republic grew more accustomed to the struggle. The initial terror gave way to grim determination. Hannibal's reliance on allies also revealed the limits of his position, while Capua joined him and became his main base in Italy for a time. Rome eventually retook the city after a brutal siege. The punishment inflicted on Capua was severe, serving as a warning to others who might consider defection. Similarly, in Sicily, Rome fought a hard campaign to bring Syracuse back under control. The famed mathematician Archimedes, whose war machines defended the city, delayed the Romans for years, but eventually Syracuse too fell, and Archimedes was killed in the sack. Rome's persistence gradually reversed the gains Hannibal had made, demonstrating that while he could win battles, Rome could win wars through endurance and relentless pressure. One of Hannibal's most remarkable achievements during this long war was simply his ability to sustain his army in hostile territory for so many years. He maneuvered through Italy with remarkable skill, avoiding entrapment and maintaining cohesion among his diverse troops: Spaniards, Gauls, Numidians, and Africans. His leadership kept these groups united even in the most difficult circumstances. Ancient historians admired the discipline he instilled and the loyalty he commanded. Yet the longer the war dragged on, the more difficult it became for him to maintain momentum. Each year that Rome refused to collapse was another year that tested his resources and strained his alliances. Rome, meanwhile, shifted the war effort beyond Italy. While holding Hannibal at bay, the Romans launched campaigns in Spain to cut off Carthaginian reinforcements and resources. They sent generals like the Scipios to contest Carthaginian power there, though the early Roman efforts met with setbacks. Eventually, a brilliant young commander, Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, emerged as Rome's answer to Hannibal. Scipio studied Hannibal's tactics carefully, learning from the disasters at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. He trained his men to be flexible and disciplined, avoiding the errors of rigid formations that had doomed earlier legions. In Spain, he struck at Carthaginian strongholds, gradually pushing them out of the peninsula and depriving Hannibal of his base of support. The balance of the war began to shift. Hannibal remained undefeated in Italy, but he was increasingly isolated. His pleas to Carthage for reinforcements went largely unanswered, or arrived too little and too late. Meanwhile, Scipio brought the war directly to North Africa, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal to defend the homeland. After more than 15 years in Italy, Hannibal finally departed, leaving behind a legacy of destruction, but also the memory of a war that had shaken Rome to its core. When he returned to Africa, he faced Scipio at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. There, the great Carthaginian who had humbled Rome met his match. Scipio, having studied Hannibal's methods, used them against him, neutralizing his elephants and maintaining discipline under pressure. In a fierce struggle, the Romans emerged victorious, and Hannibal's long campaign ended in defeat. Carthage was forced to sue for peace, marking the conclusion of the Second Punic War. Yet even in defeat, Hannibal's legacy endured. His invasion of Italy had brought Rome closer to destruction than any enemy before or since. He had taught the Romans lessons in humility, strategy, and resilience. The battles of Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and especially Cannae became part of Roman memory, studied by generals for generations to come. Rome's eventual victory was not the result of one brilliant commander or one decisive battle alone, but of the Republic's collective will to endure catastrophe, to rebuild after losses that would have destroyed lesser states, and to refuse surrender even when defeat seemed inevitable. This resilience was the true secret of Rome's rise to empire. Hannibal had exposed their weaknesses, but in doing so, he also forged their strengths. By surviving Hannibal, Rome proved that it could survive anything. The closing chapter of Hannibal's war in Italy is thus not only a story of one man's genius, but also of a nation's indomitable spirit. Hannibal demonstrated the heights of tactical brilliance, the art of deception, and the power of audacity. Rome answered with endurance, political unity, and the capacity to adapt. In this struggle between two titans, one, a general of unrivaled skill, the other, a republic of unmatched resilience, the world witnessed one of the greatest contests in history. The scars of that war remained on the Italian landscape for decades, but the lessons it taught about leadership, persistence, and the nature of power endured for centuries. Hannibal's long war in Italy had not broken Rome. Instead, it had shaped the Republic into the empire it was destined to become.